The first Jane Doe in the case against P. Diddy has been identified as Anna Kane, ex-wife of NHL player Evander Kane. For over a year, her identity remained hidden, but a recent court ruling required her name to be made public, raising questions about the future of her case and others like it. This shift stems from Cassie Ventura's lawsuit against Diddy, filed in November of last year, accusing him of years of abuse. Cassie's case, filed under the New York Survivors Act, allowed victims to seek justice despite statute of limitations, inspiring other survivors to come forward.
Cassie's lawsuit was settled outside of court just one day after it was filed, but it was too late. The damage was done.
The case involving Anna Kane, Jane Doe, against P. Diddy illustrates the balance courts must maintain between protecting the privacy of sexual assault survivors and ensuring legal transparency. The court ruled that while Kane's allegations were sensitive and she was a minor at the time, her desire to remain anonymous did not outweigh the public's interest in knowing her identity. Citing similar cases involving figures like Kevin Spacey and Harvey Weinstein, the judge found no evidence of current risks to justify continued anonymity. The ruling favored transparency but stayed its effect pending further motions, indicating potential future reconsideration.
So even though this ruling had been made, the plaintiff's name remained Jane Doe on the lawsuit until a new ruling last week.
The court addressed the defense's argument that Anna Kane's allegations were time-barred and the corporate defendants were not liable. However, the judge also ruled that Kane could no longer proceed anonymously, citing a prior ruling. As a result, Kane's identity was publicly revealed. Previously known as the ex-wife of NHL player Evander Kane, Kane also has a significant social media following. Following the revelation, she issued a statement affirming her readiness to seek justice despite attempts to intimidate her. This decision raises questions about the balance between privacy and transparency in cases involving sensitive allegations.
Well, it's a yes and no. I'm used to state law, and under state law in states like California, victims of sexual abuse, especially sexual abuse as a minor, can remain anonymous. But we're in federal court, and there is no corresponding rule of civil procedure. This is one of those cases where laws in different states, or even within a state, between state and federal court, can differ. And under the Federal Rule of Civil Procedure 10, there's a presumption that the parties are not going to be anonymous.
Why do you think the court ruled this way? I can understand why she wanted to keep her name out of the news, but do you think the ruling was justifiable?
I think it is. Obviously, there's no real clear answer here. Judges have a lot of discretion because, again, it's not like there's a hard and fast rule where if you're a victim of sexual assault, if you're a victim of sexual abuse, you get to remain anonymous like certain states have. So it's up to the judge, and he or she needs to weigh different factors. And one of them is there any prejudice to the defendant? Does it make it more difficult for him to defend his case not knowing who it is? Is there potential harm to the plaintiff or the victim who wants to remain anonymous? What about the sensitive nature of the allegation? So the judge balanced them here and ultimately ruled that upon balancing, it actually favors Combs, and that's why she had to really unmask herself and identify herself in the pleadings.
Unmasked is an interesting word to use because, for the past year, we've been discussing Jane Doe. Many of us feel like we know her case inside and out. But now, with her identity revealed, it changes everything. She's no longer just a faceless figure in a legal battle. She is a person with a name, and suddenly, we can trace the timeline of her life. How does this shift impact Anna Kane now that her name is public?
Well, it does potentially change things and change things for other victims as well. So there is a strategic benefit here because maybe people that don't want their identity revealed, maybe they'll be a little bit hesitant to file a lawsuit or accuse someone like Combs if they have to identify themselves. Obviously, there are people watching. Some of them believe that, she was assaulted and what she's doing is righteous. And I'm sure there are people watching who disagree. And, when people are identified in a very public lawsuit, which this is, I wouldn't be surprised if she gets some hate comments or folks who don't believe her. So it may be an impediment. I certainly believe victims of abuse, but it may give some of them pause when deciding whether to file a lawsuit or not.
It's interesting to think about the future lawsuits that could be filed against Diddy or others. But there are already accusers, like Jane Doe and others, who have filed suits. They just haven't made their names public yet. Given the ruling in Anna Kane's case, what do you think this means for those lawsuits? Do you think they'll now be required to reveal their identities as well?
Not necessarily. Really, this is a judge-specific ruling. Now, with respect to this judge, absolutely. I would advise my clients, and I represent victims of sexual abuse and assault all the time. I'd say, if we draw this judge, there is a very real possibility that you're going to have to identify yourself. Do you still want to move forward? I have clients all the time that tell me, I'm scared, I'm worried about myself, about my family, people online. I don't want to do this unless I can remain anonymous. So it is an important factor. And I think lawyers are going to have to start advising their clients, hey, if we draw the wrong judge in federal court, you may have to identify yourself and you still want to move forward. But with respect to different judges, it doesn't matter. There's no precedential impact. One judge doesn't have to follow another judge, of course, unless it's a higher court, which this isn't.
It's interesting, especially in this case, that Jane Doe was only 17 when the alleged incidents occurred, so she was underage at the time. You mentioned there's no federal statute requiring anonymity for minors in these cases. Do you think that will affect other similar lawsuits, especially since there are accusations where the alleged victims were even younger, some as young as 9 or 13 years old? While there may not be a federal law on anonymity for minors, the fact that these victims are at such a young and vulnerable age, doesn't that factor into how their cases might be handled as well?
That's something the judge may take into consideration. Obviously, we're talking about allegations that are more than 2 decades old with respect to Anna Kane and with respect to the 13-year-old. So the question is, is a judge going to take that into consideration? Hey, you were 9, you were 13, you weren't 17. Now, obviously, Anna Kane was just in high school at the time. She was just in 11th grade when all this allegedly happened. So I still think that she's a minor. So will a judge potentially draw a distinction? I don't know. I think that's going to really depend on the judge and what their views are in terms of transparency and public access in these types of cases.
We've been focusing a lot on the civil side of things right now, but if we remember 1 year ago, there were no criminal charges filed against Diddy. Everything was still speculation, and it was all about civil suits. This, of course, set the stage for potential criminal charges. So now that we know Jane Doe's name as Anna Kane, do you think it's possible that she could be called to testify or be involved in Diddy's criminal case?
It's certainly possible. And obviously, there's a higher standard in a criminal case, and criminal prosecutors tend to be a little bit more conservative. They're not going to take a kitchen sink approach and charge the more than 100 victims who will probably file civil lawsuits in this case. Obviously, dozens of them have already. They're going to pick and choose the ones that they think are the strongest witnesses and victims. That being said, Sierra, you and I have talked about this. Minor victims change the game for Combs, for Jay-Z. It doesn't matter, and this is why. The argument has always been that, at least with respect to the freak-offs that happened, they were consensual. Well, certainly someone like Kane or any other minor can't consent to sexual contact. So the defense will be very different. It'll be that the contact never happened at all and that this is all fabricated.
It's interesting that we're talking about people being named because we've already learned Jane Doe's name is Anna Kane, and in a different suit, we now believe Celebrity A to be Jay-Z. There's also Celebrity B, a female whose identity we're not entirely sure of yet, though we could infer it. Now that we have Jay-Z's name listed, do you think that the identities of other plaintiffs who are currently listed as unidentified or Celebrity A could also be revealed soon?
I do believe so, and this goes to some of the strategies that we've talked about, right? The defense wants to unmask these plaintiffs, but some of the plaintiffs' lawyers, what they're trying to do is enter into a pre-litigation settlement, right? Obviously, that's confidential. We talk about lawsuits. Those are public, right? The allegations are public. Maybe you can remain anonymous, maybe you can't, but the details are certainly public. Obviously, an out-of-court settlement before a lawsuit is private. So what Tony Busby and some of the lawyers representing the plaintiffs tried to do is, negotiate a pre-litigation settlement. Obviously, it didn't work in the Jay-Z case, and now that's all become public. But I do believe that that is the first domino, and we're going to see more and more celebrities named, whether it's Celebrity B. Obviously, there's a lot of speculation as to who that is, that female celebrity. But I wouldn't be surprised if there's other celebrities named as well, because, look, I'm here in Hollywood, and there are a lot of people who went to Diddy's white parties, and allegedly, a lot of people who participated in these freak-offs, whether as actual participants or witnesses. So I think it's just a matter of time before we start seeing and hearing more names.
It's interesting to see the parallels between P. Diddy and now Jay-Z. A year ago, Diddy didn't settle with Cassie before she filed her lawsuit. And that, as we all know, opened the floodgates for more accusations. Now, we see a similar pattern with Jay-Z. He didn't settle outside of court, and now his name is publicly revealed. What do you make of that?
Yeah, this is going to go one of two ways. And not only did Jay-Z not settle, he actually filed against Busby. Pretty aggressive move alleging extortion. So there was no offer. And in fact, a lawsuit was filed affirmatively by Jay-Z's lawyer, Alex Spiro of Quinn Emanuel. So that case isn't going to settle. So I think this is going to go in one of two ways. Either this is going to be a one-off case that Jay-Z and his lawyer will defend, potentially settle. I'm not saying it's going to go all the way to trial, but it's just going to be one. Or this might be a Me Too type situation. Having represented lots of victims, there is always a hesitation to be first, especially if you're filing against a rich and powerful individual that has a lot of assets, especially access to lawyers. So we've seen it with Cassie Ventura, right? When she filed, other people came forward. So is this going to be a snowball effect like we saw with Diddy, or is this just going to be an isolated case? I think we'll know in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah, I guess we just have to be patient. We've been following Diddy for a year now, and if you look at how things have developed from then to now, we can only wait to see where it goes with everyone involved. Nima, thank you for coming on today and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thanks for having me, Sierra. As always, I'm sure we're going to be talking.
We talked a lot about civil allegations today, but it's important to note that P. Diddy also faces multiple federal sex crime charges, to which he has pleaded not guilty. He's set to go to trial in May 2025. For Long Crime, I'm Southeast Gatsby.